Now I'm going to go through a series of maps that clearly show the urban heat island effect. And so in this first one, what we're doing is essentially this is a remotely sensed image, and it's showing the heat of the surface. And so what this is just showing this temperature of the surface, but nonetheless what we can see is where people live. So you might not know anything about Japan, but overwhelmingly most of the population lives in just a few urban areas, especially in what they call the Kanto Plain, which is where Tokyo is. So if you've ever been to Japan, you've probably flown into Tokyo, and you can see that huge, dense urban area. But it also shows here on the temperature map. And if we look at the bottom, it has our key yellow. Those are hot surfaces. Blues and whites, cooler surfaces. And so the exceptions are, of course, as we go further away from the equator, we're going to get up here in the northern parts of Japan, cooler temperatures. Also in mountainous areas, we can see the blues. But clearly here in the dense urban areas, you can see hotter surfaces here in Tokyo. Now let's go to New York City. Here it's interesting. On the left we've got temperature. So this is essentially just measuring temperature of the surface. And so hotter surfaces are white, cooler surfaces are dark blue. This over here is just essentially showing vegetation, where we have dense vegetation, it's dark green, hardly any vegetation, it's shown as white. And so vegetation helps to promote cooling at the surface. So we have something called evapotranspiration. Essentially, leaves are perspiring, and a byproduct of that perspiration is evaporation and cooling at the surface. And so where we have dense vegetation, guess what we also have? We also have cooler temperatures. So we can see that in this particular island here. We can see that also very clearly with this rectangular box right in the middle of the part of Manhattan. We can see that. Well, what is that rectangular box? That's Central Park. So what's fascinating is Central Park is clearly shown here on a map on the left that just shows temperature. And so once again, we can see the role of vegetation or the lack thereof in causing higher temperatures in other areas. And so the heavily built environment of the skyscrapers of all what we see here in Manhattan are very clearly shown as white because there's no vegetation where there's huge buildings, and subsequently temperatures are a little warmer. Now let's go to Baltimore, another place in which we can see an overlap between where people live, dense, heavy urban areas. And so this is a map of what we're seeing now is a map of where people live, heavy population density. And so essentially where urban areas are, where we're going to see dense neighborhoods and black surfaces in terms of pavement. We've got blacktop, we've got tops of buildings, we've got all the various buildings and bricks and metals and all we can see. But also notice the little pockets of parks that as I go back and forth, for example, Patterson Park, here it's cooler. White surfaces in this case are hotter, so we can see Patterson Park actually sticks out. That Druid Hill Park actually sticks out when we look at the temperature map, and so it's cooler, and so once again vegetation. Now let's go to Hotlanta. So here's a map that shows an aerial photograph of Atlanta. You can kind of see, it's a lot of greens and grays. Where do people live in Atlanta? The best way to showcase that is a temperature map. And so what I'm slowly showing here is a temperature map, and the red is where we have hotter surfaces, the lighter colors are where we have cooler surfaces in this case, in this particular temperature map. So the reds are hotter, and we can see all these dense urban areas. One of the things about Atlanta is very spread out. It's got multiple downtowns, and it's almost we can see all these various hotter surfaces here in Hotlanta. It's called that for a reason. As I kind of go back and forth, you can see that development where we see the built environment also relates to where we see warmer temperatures. Another cool way to look at Atlanta is kind of this 3D perspective, kind of from the side view. And so now we're looking at temperatures. White in this case is hotter, and our cooler temperatures are our yellows, blues, and greens. And so what this shows is all these very hot tops of these buildings. They're this is probably black top, the tops of the buildings, which is why they're so stinking hot. Also, you can see the role of shadows. So the blues are just the shadows, and so we know the sun's coming from over here. Sun's over here shining this way, creating shadows, which obviously is going to promote cooling. And so these tall skyscrapers just essentially are just attracting all this heat on one side outside, and it's helping to cause this built environment to be warmer and warmer and warmer. Interesting. What's this feature over here in the bottom left that's cooler? Well, that's the old Georgia Dome. This was back when the Georgia Dome existed, and so it had this white top, this essentially this canvas top, and so that white top actually, because of its albedo, did a good job of reflecting, and so what it did is actually promoted cooling at the surface. Meanwhile, these other buildings right next to it, including the CNN building, have a very dark top that's going to absorb heat and thus have higher temperatures. Finally, let's look at Indianapolis, and so here we can see, first off, the river, the White River that comes right through here, and then the downtown. All the heavily built environment of the downtown, the central business district. Here's IUPUI. But as you go further away, this particular Franklin Township, of all the townships of Marion County, is the least developed. And so with less development, less built environment, a lot more ag, a lot more trees that you'll find in that particular area is why, thus, you're going to see cooler surfaces over here in the bottom right-hand corner of Marion County. What's going on up here? This is the Eagle Creek Park, and so here you have forested area, so once again vegetation going to promote cooling at the surface, but nonetheless what we can see is the built environment. We've got the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, we've got Lafayette Square, the built environment up there, we've got the north side, like for example North Central, 86th Street, all this built environment, the heavily dense urban area to the east and to the south and to the west and to the north of the downtown area, but as you go farther away, definitely gets cooler, so we see that urban heat island effect very clearly here in this map.